From Toronto studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Saamiyah Syed. Our top story tonight. The United States has rejected Australia's request for Julian Assange's release. Australia is demanding the case be brought to a close. The US, on the other hand, is demanding Assange's extradition on charges of espionage. Their different stances became clear during a meeting Sunday between U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and his Australian counterpart, Penny Wong, in Brisbane. Assange is an Australian citizen being held in Britain, where authorities last year approved his extradition to the U.S. He is wanted for his alleged role in leaking classified U.S. military information. Many media outlets worldwide have called on the United States to drop charges against Assange. Australia is calling for him to be returned to his country of origin. However, it has also stressed that it is not in a position to intervene in another country's legal proceedings. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC, has proposed new rules for banks with more than $100 billion in total assets. They would replace the current system, which allows banks to use internal models to calculate their risk-based capital requirements. The FDIC also is proposing new rules for securities financing transactions and market risk. The move comes after the failure of 3 U.S. banks in recent months. The new rules would take effect in 2025. They would make it harder for banks to understate their risk-based capital requirements and engage in risky securities financing transactions. They would also help ensure banks have enough capital to withstand unexpected losses. A federal judge in Florida has dismissed a $475 million defamation lawsuit filed by former President Donald Trump against CNN. District Judge Rag Singhal explained that use of the phrase "the big lie" or similar statements are opinions and not facts. Therefore, they do not meet the standard for defamation. The judge also ruled being described as Hitler-like is not a verifiable factual allegation that would support a defamation claim. This is one of many lawsuits Trump has filed against media outlets, including the New York Times and Washington Post. Trump objects to their coverage during his presidency and after the 2020 presidential election, which he lost to President Joe Biden. Trump's campaign spokesman, Stephen Chung, says they agree that the judge's findings that CNN statements about Trump are reprehensible. The U.S. has imposed sanctions and classified Abdulwali Muhammad Yusuf, the Somali-based leader of ISIS, as a global terrorist. The U.S. Treasury Department says Yusuf was involved in facilitating the movement of foreign fighters, supplies, and ammunition for the terrorist group. The ISIS-linked group in Somalia generates much of its revenue through extortion. It targets local communities for money and recruits while threatening violence. Sanctions followed Treasury Department's Undersecretary for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence Brian Nelson's meeting with Somali President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. The Horn of Africa country has struggled with security problems for years, with terrorist groups Al-Shabaab and ISIS posing a major threat. Just earlier this year, a U.S. airstrike in Somalia killed ISIS leader Suhail Salim Abdulrahman, also known as Bilal al-Sudani. A group of 11 U.S. senators and over 20 human rights groups have called on President Joe Biden's administration to withhold military aid to Egypt. They said the over $320 million in military aid must be suspended because of Egypt's poor human rights record. They argue Egypt has failed to investigate allegations of human rights abuses. Led by Senator Chris Murphy, 10 Democrats, and Bernie Sanders, an independent, they sent a letter to Secretary of State Antony Blinken. They say the Egyptian government is complicit in continued extrajudicial killings, disappearances, torture, and restrictions on freedom of expression and assembly, among other violations. They also cited the recent arrest of supporters and family members of a challenger to President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in next year's presidential election. The U.S. government ties much of its military aid to countries willing to improve their human rights situation. That includes strengthening the rule of law and democratic institutions, holding security forces accountable for human rights abuses, and investigating the prosecuting cases of extrajudicial executions and enforced disappearances. The senators and human rights groups claim that the Egyptian government has recently cracked down on the press, political opposition, and civil society. The Biden administration says it is deeply concerned about the human rights situation in Egypt, but has not yet announced whether it will withhold military aid. An Israeli court has approved the forced eviction of hundreds of Palestinian Bedouins from the village of Ras Jabra in the Negev desert. The ruling helps the Israeli government make way for the expansion of the Jewish settlement of Dimona. Human rights groups have condemned the court's decision. Activists are calling it a clear example of ethnic cleansing and apartheid against Israel's Palestinian citizens. Amnesty International is calling it a grave injustice and a clear violation of international law. The villagers have also been ordered to pay more than $30,000 in court costs. Adala, an Israeli rights advocacy group, promised to appeal the court's decision. The residents of Ras Jabra have lived there for generations, but Israeli authorities do not recognize their village as legal. The Israel Land Authority, responsible for managing state land, claims the Ras Jabra villagers are squatters. More on how a young Muslim saved 17 people from a fire in France comes with details after the break, so stay tuned and we'll be right back. Welcome back. A young French Muslim risked his life entering a burning building to save 17 people, including a baby. He is now being hailed a hero. Radio station France Bleu reported a fire broke out on Friday in a two-story building in southeastern France. Izzeddin Hamdi, a baker, rushed into the building despite the flames and smoke. He got into the building through the window with the help of a ladder. Many Twitter users says he deserves the Legion of Honor, France's highest civilian order of merit. Hamdi has already saved people before firefighters even arrived on the scene. Baptiste Davis, one of the firefighters, said the flames were over 16 feet high when they arrived. More than 100 people were reportedly injured in the Bangladeshi capital Dhaka as the opposition Bangladesh Nationalist Party, or BNP, protested against the government. Reports say a police vehicle and 3 public buses were set on fire and several private vehicles were damaged during the protests. The opposition and ruling parties are blaming each other for the incidents. The BNP has been demanding a neutral government to conduct elections. The ruling Awami League party says it will hold elections in December or early January under incumbent Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Police have detained more than 1,000 BNP supporters. Bangladesh's largest Islamist party, Jamaat-e-Islami, condemned the police attacks. It said 200 of its leaders and supporters have also been detained nationwide. US and Western allies have called for free and participatory elections in Bangladesh. The Bangladesh government has rejected Western demands, saying they constitute foreign interference in internal affairs. 44 people were killed and hundreds injured Sunday in a suicide bomb attack at a political rally in northwestern Pakistan. The blast occurred in Bajaur district near the border with Afghanistan. Members of the political religious party Jamiat-ul-Ulema-e-Islam, or JUI, had gathered in the region for a rally. The JUI is a coalition partner in the federal government and has been attacked by the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan in the past. Local JUI chief Maulana Ziaullah was among those killed. A cameraman from the local Geo News television station was also seriously injured. So far, no one has claimed responsibility for the attack. However, the TTP has been blamed for a series of terrorist attacks in Pakistan. Terrorist attacks in Pakistan have increased since the Taliban regained power in neighboring Afghanistan in August 2021. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif condemned the incident and instructed security forces to do everything to bring the perpetrators to justice. Rohingya refugees living in Bangladesh have been affected by the recent cut in food rations by the United Nations. The EU has announced a new $3.6 million contribution to help Rohingya refugees. A 5-member EU team led by Special Representative for Human Rights Eamon Gilmore visited refugee camps Thursday. The refugees urged the EU team to increase the food aid and narrated their experiences during Burma's brutal military genocide in 2017. They say most refugees want to return to Burma in a safe and dignified manner. The UN World Food Programme has cut food rations for Rohingya refugees from $10 to $8 per month due to funding shortages. The refugees have been living in overcrowded camps in Bangladesh's Cox's Bazar since the fleeing of the military genocide in 2017. The EU is the second largest donor of humanitarian aid to the Rohingya refugees. The burning of a Quran outside a mosque in Sweden threatens to escalate into a trade war. Influential Muslim groups in the Middle East and North Africa have called for a boycott of Swedish products. Just last week, the Al-Azhar Mosque in Cairo, the oldest Sunni institution in the world, called on Muslims to boycott Swedish products. Yemen's Minister of Industry and Trade, Mohammed Sharif al-Mutahhar, announced a boycott of Swedish products earlier this month. Similarly, Mohsen Rezaian, Secretary of Iran's Supreme Council for Economic Coordination, called for a boycott on July 23rd. And last month, a 37-year-old Iraqi refugee tore out pages from the Quran and set them on fire outside Stockholm's central mosque. A Swedish court allowed him to continue the desecration. Sweden is one of Europe's largest economies with a GDP of over $500 billion. IKEA, which manufactures and sells furniture and home accessories, fashion retailer H&M, home appliance maker Electrolux, and mobile technology provider Ericsson are based in Sweden. Turkey and Saudi Arabia are the largest importers of Swedish products among Muslim countries. And Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says his country will teach a lesson to arrogant Westerners who insult Muslims. Saudi Arabia says hateful and repeated acts cannot be justified. Indian Christians have been under attack in Manipur, India since May this year. Let's watch a special report on this issue. More than 250 churches in India have been torched into ashes in a matter of days. Since May of 2023, 60,000 people of Manipur, India have been displaced, and 140 are dead. Manipur is a small state located in northeast India. The state has been burning for the last 3 months. Christians, who are a minority in Manipur, are on the receiving end of this violence. Hindu majorities are attacking the Christians, burning their villages, and raping women. The BJP RSS regime rules the state. Police have been siding with Hindus. Christian women were paraded naked and gang-raped as the police watched. Muslims are usually the primary targets of Hindu extremism. The Indian government has historically brushed off these attacks on minorities as riots, and the government often blames both sides. but Hindu majorities attacking Christian minorities with help from the police while the BJP RSS regime rules cannot be called a riot. And that's because both sides are not equal. These attacks should be called a pogrom, not a riot. That's all from our Toronto studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell icon for the latest updates. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.